You are listening to HOA Spot. I brought facts, not feelings. I drive a FedEx-style route 6 days a week in Buffalo, and every delay costs me delivery windows I cannot get back. So when Jennifer Martinez blocked my driveway with her sedan at 7 in the morning, engine still running, and started yelling that my guest permit was expired, even though the date was not readable from her angle, I knew this was going to be one of those days. She had a tire clamp in her trunk, already half opened like she had been waiting for this moment, and a flashlight she kept shining at my windshield decal like it was a forgery. The drizzle was picking up, forcing both of us under the eave by my garage, and she was jingling a key ring with too many keys like it was some kind of authority badge. I am trying to keep my neighborhood reputation clean, and the HOA is smearing me with violation logs that read like personal vendettas. This is Maplewood Commons Property Owners Association, a community where leadership treats neighbors like suspects after dark. And Jennifer Martinez is the communications director who controls every email blast, every meeting agenda, and apparently every tow vendor callback list in the zip code. She leaned in, rain dripping off the brim of her white sun hat, and said, "You think this is petty. I think this is my purpose. I have seen your guest log, and you are over the limit." I told her the guest pass on my dashboard was valid through next month and she could check the HOA portal herself. She laughed, a sharp bark that echoed under the eave, and said, "I can put you on the agenda and keep you there." That is when I noticed the tow truck idling 2 houses down, amber lights flashing through the mist, and the operator standing back by the cab, listening carefully to every word we said. Jennifer had her phone out, filming me on a gimbal like she was producing a compliance documentary, and I could see the smugness in her face every time she angled the shot to make it look like I was blocking her exit. I was not blocking anything. She had pulled in behind my work van deliberately, trapping me on my own property, and now she was narrating for her camera about fire lane violations and decal fraud. I kept my voice calm and said, "Jennifer, I have a board hearing scheduled for today, and if I miss it, they plan to default vote against me." She smiled, the kind of smile that makes you realize she had planned this exact timing, and said, "Then you should have followed the rules." She walked back to her trunk, pulled out a clipboard, and started writing a violation notice right there in the rain, her pen clicking in frustration every time the ink skipped on the wet paper. The tow operator took a step closer, hands in his pockets, and I could see him watching her more than me. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I had been collecting for 3 weeks, neighbor witness statements with same-day photos in identical lighting, all showing my guest pass clearly visible and valid. I also had a screenshot of the HOA group chat that I had not shown anyone yet, where Jennifer coordinated a retaliation plan with 2 other board members and the tow vendor, complete with timestamps and plate numbers. I stared at the violation letter she was writing and smiled, because it proved exactly what I suspected. She saw my expression and her smugness flickered. She said, "What are you grinning about?" I told her I would see her at the hearing and walked past her to my van. She stepped in front of me, keys jangling, and said, "You are not going anywhere until I log this." The tow operator cleared his throat and said, "Ma'am, if his vehicle is on his own property and he has a valid pass, I cannot hook it." Jennifer spun on him, flashlight beam swinging wild, and snapped, "I am the one who called you, and I am telling you this is a violation." The operator looked at me, then back at her, and said, "I need to see the rule in writing before I touch anything." That bought me 30 seconds. I opened my van door, grabbed the clean packet I had been building for 2 months, and handed it to the operator. I said, "Here is the incident log, the permit registry, and 3 signed witness statements." Jennifer tried to snatch the packet out of his hands, but he stepped back and said, I am going to call my dispatch and get a supervisor opinion on this." Jennifer turned back to me, face red under the brim of her hat, and said, "You think you are clever, but I have been documenting every single guest arrival for 6 months." I told her that was interesting because the HOA bylaws only allow spot checks, not surveillance. She said, "I am not surveilling, I am enforcing." I said, "You logged my brother's visit at 2 in the morning last month and sent a fine the next day. That is not enforcement, that is harassment." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, and I saw her grip tighten on the key ring. The tow operator stepped back to his truck, phone to his ear, and I could hear him saying something about liability and property lines. Jennifer walked around my van, shining her flashlight at every window sticker and plate edge, looking for something else to cite. She found a parking permit decal from last year that I had peeled off but left a faint adhesive shadow, and she started taking close-up photos like it was evidence of fraud. The operator came back and said, "My supervisor says I cannot tow unless there is a clear code violation and the property owner consents." Jennifer said, "I am the HOA representative and I am telling you to tow." He said, "The vehicle is on private property and he has documentation. I need a signed authorization from the property owner or a police order." Jennifer pulled out her phone and started dialing, muttering about calling the Buffalo PD non-emergency line, and I knew she was about to waste another hour of my morning. I checked my watch. The board hearing was in 90 minutes, and I still had to pick up my ally, a neighborhood security guard named Marcus, who had quit last month after being used as muscle one too many times and was ready to testify. Jennifer saw me looking at my watch and said, "You are not getting out of this." I said, "I am not trying to get out of anything. I am trying to get to work and then to the hearing you scheduled." She said, "If you leave now, I will add obstruction to the complaint log." I took a breath and said, "Jennifer, if you keep me here, I am going to submit this packet to the HOA attorney and ask for a formal review of your communications role." She froze, pen mid-click, and said, "You do not have the authority to do that." I said, "Any homeowner can request a review if there is evidence of retaliation or misuse of vendor relationships." Her face went pale, just for a second, and then she recovered and said, "You are bluffing." I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshot of the group chat, and held it up so she could see the header but not the full messages. I said, "I have the whole thread, Jennifer. The tow vendor callback arrangement, the plate tracking spreadsheet, and the part where you told the board you could put me on the agenda and keep me there." She lunged for my phone, but I stepped back, and the tow operator stepped between us, hands up, saying, "Whoa, let us all take a breath here." Jennifer backed off, breathing hard, and said, "Fine, go to your hearing. But this is not over." I got in my van, started the engine, and pulled out around her sedan, watching her in the rearview mirror as she stood there in the drizzle, keys jangling, staring at the tire clamp she never got to use. The tow operator was already packing up his equipment, and I could see him shaking his head. I drove to Marcus's apartment, picked him up with 5 minutes to spare, and he said, "She really tried to clamp you in your own driveway?" I said, "She had the clamp ready and a tow truck on speed dial." He said, "That is not enforcement. That is obsession." I told him about the group chat screenshot, and he said, "You have to show that at the hearing. They have been doing this to half a dozen people, and no one has proof." We got to the community center where the board holds meetings, and the parking lot was already full. I saw Jennifer's sedan in the front row, and next to it was the property management company van and 2 other board member cars. Marcus said, "They stacked the room." I said, "Good, more witnesses." We walked in, and the hearing room was set up like a courtroom with the board at a long table facing rows of folding chairs. Jennifer was at the far end, laptop open, already typing. The board president, a retired accountant named Dale, was shuffling papers and looking uncomfortable. There were maybe 20 neighbors in the audience, most of them people I recognized from the violation blitz Jennifer had been running since spring. A couple of them nodded at me. One guy in the back, who had gotten fined for a guest staying 3 days instead of 2, gave me a thumbs up. Dale called the meeting to order and said, "We are here to review the parking compliance matter involving the homeowner at Unit 214. Jennifer, you filed the complaint, so please present your case." Jennifer stood up, walked to the front, and plugged in a thumb drive. A PowerPoint appeared on the projector screen, titled Parking Enforcement and Neighborhood Safety. No readable text on any of the slides, but I could see graphs, photos, and highlighted sections that looked like they were pulled straight from her surveillance log. She clicked through, narrating each slide, talking about fire lane safety, guest limits, permit expiration dates, and decal fraud. Every third sentence, she glanced at me with that same smug look. She got to a slide that showed a photo of my van in my driveway, taken at night, and said, "This vehicle was parked in a manner that obstructed emergency access." I raised my hand and said, "That photo is from my own driveway, which is private property." Jennifer said, "The fire lane rule applies to any vehicle that could block access." I said, "There is no fire lane on my driveway." Dale looked at Jennifer and said, "Is that true?" Jennifer hesitated, then said, "The rule is broadly interpreted." Dale said, "I think we need to see the actual rule language." Jennifer clicked to the next slide, which showed a section of the parking policy, and I could see her scrambling to find the part that backed her up. She read aloud, "Any vehicle that obstructs or impedes emergency vehicle access may be subject to towing." I said, "My driveway is 15 feet from the street and marked private." "No emergency vehicle has ever been impeded," Jennifer said. "But it could be." Dale sighed and said, "Let us move on." "Do you have other violations to present?" Jennifer clicked through 3 more slides, each one showing a different alleged violation. One was about a guest pass that she claimed was expired, even though the date on the pass was clearly visible in her own photo and showed it was valid. Another was about my van being parked on the street overnight, which she said violated the no street parking rule, except the rule only applies between 2 and 6 in the morning, and her own timestamp showed I had moved it by 1:50. The third was a complaint log entry that was obviously written in her voice, accusing me of intimidating behavior toward HOA volunteers, which was code for me asking questions at the last meeting. Dale asked if I wanted to respond, and I stood up, walked to the front, and pulled out my packet. I said, "I have witness statements from 3 neighbors who were present during each of these alleged violations, and all of them confirm that I was in compliance. I also have photos taken at the same time as Jennifer's photos, showing the guest pass clearly valid, the van moved before the cutoff, and no obstruction of any kind." I handed the packet to Dale, and he flipped through it, frowning. Jennifer said, "Those statements are biased." The neighbors are friends of his. I said, 2 of them have never spoken to me outside of HOA meetings, and one of them is Marcus, who worked as your security contractor until last month when you asked him to log plates without probable cause. Jennifer's face went red and she said, "That is a lie." Marcus stood up in the audience and said, "I have the text messages, Jennifer. You told me to flag any repeat guest vehicles and report them to you directly, bypassing the normal violation process." Dale said, "Is this true, Jennifer?" Jennifer said, "I was trying to streamline enforcement." Dale said, "That is not your role. You are communications director, not enforcement. Jennifer said someone has to do it because no one else is paying attention. Dale said we have a management company for that. Jennifer said the management company is useless. They let people get away with everything. Dale looked at the other board members, then back at Jennifer and said, I think we need to take a recess and discuss this privately. Jennifer said, no. I want this on record. I want a vote today. Dale said, Jennifer, sit down. She did not sit. She said, I am the one who built the enforcement system. I am the one who cleaned up this neighborhood. If you do not support me, then you are part of the problem. One of the other board members, a woman named Linda, said, Jennifer, you are out of line. Jennifer spun on her and said, you voted for every single fine I recommended. Do not act like you are innocent. Linda said, I voted based on the information you provided. If that information was incomplete or biased, then we need to revisit those votes. Jennifer slammed her laptop shut and said, fine, I will resign. Right now. Dale said, no one is asking you to resign. We are asking you to follow procedure. Jennifer picked up her laptop, unplugged the thumb drive, and walked toward the door. She stopped in front of me, keys jangling, and said, you think you won? This is just getting started. Then she left, and the room went silent for about 5 seconds before everyone started talking at once. Dale banged a gavel and said, we are taking a 15-minute recess. I sat down next to Marcus, and he said, that was wild. I said, she is going to escalate. He said, let her. You have the evidence. I pulled out my phone and checked the group chat screenshot again, making sure it was backed up in 3 places. The timestamp showed Jennifer had sent the first message to the tow vendor 6 weeks ago, right after I asked a question at a meeting about guest parking limits. The vendor had responded with a rate sheet and a note that said, happy to help with problem properties. Jennifer had replied, start with Unit 214. Repeat offender. I had not been a repeat offender. I had one prior guest parking notice from a year ago that was dismissed after I showed proof the guest had left early. The recess ended, and Dale called everyone back. He said, we have reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, and we are tabling the parking violation pending a full audit of the enforcement process. Jennifer is not here, so we will notify her by email. In the meantime, all pending fines related to this matter are suspended. I said I would also like to request a formal review of the vendor relationship between the HOA and the towing company. Dale looked uncomfortable and said, what do you mean? I said, I have evidence that suggests the towing company was given preferential access to homeowner information and was directed to target specific properties without proper authorization. Dale said, that is a serious allegation. I said, I am happy to provide the evidence to the board attorney. Linda said, I think we should see it now. I walked back to the front, connected my phone to the projector, and pulled up the group chat screenshot. The room went dead quiet. The messages were all there, Jennifer coordinating with the tow vendor, the board president at the time, who had since moved out of state, and 2 other board members who were not present today. The vendor had sent a spreadsheet with plate numbers, and Jennifer had highlighted mine in red with a note that said, priority target. Expires soon, push hard. Dale stared at the screen and said, when did you get this? I said 3 weeks ago. A neighbor who was removed from the group chat forwarded it to me after Jennifer tried to fine him for the same guest parking issue. Dale said, this is completely inappropriate. Linda said, this is grounds for removal. Dale said, and possibly legal action. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real HOA drama. Marcus leaned over and whispered, "You just nuked her entire operation." I said, "Not yet. We still have to lock it in." Dale said, "I am going to contact our attorney today and request a full audit of all enforcement actions taken in the last year. If any of them were based on biased or selective enforcement, we will reverse them and issue refunds. I also want a review of all vendor contracts. If there is any evidence of kickbacks or preferential treatment, we will terminate those contracts immediately." The room erupted in applause. I sat down and tried not to smile too hard, because I knew Jennifer was not going to let this go quietly. After the meeting, I walked out to the parking lot and found Jennifer leaning against my van, arms crossed, white sun hat tilted back. She said, "You just destroyed a year of work." I said, "You destroyed it yourself when you decided to use the HOA as a personal enforcement agency." She said, "I was protecting property values." I said, "You were harassing neighbors." She pulled out her phone and said, "I am filing a defamation complaint." I said, "Go ahead. I have witnesses and documentation for every single claim I made in there." She said, "You think you are safe now?" I still have access to every email list, every vendor contact, every board file. I said, "Not after the audit, you do not." She smiled, the same cold smile from the driveway, and said, "We will see." I got in my van and drove to the grocery store to pick up a few things before my afternoon route. I was loading bags into the back when Jennifer pulled into the lot, parked 2 spaces over, and got out with her phone already recording. She walked up to me, stood about 3 feet away, and said loudly, "You are parked in a fire lane." I looked down. I was in a normal parking space, clearly marked, nowhere near a fire lane. I said, "Jennifer, I am in a legal spot." She said, "No, you are over the line." I said, "I am not." She stepped closer, phone aimed at my face, and said, "You are intimidating me. I am documenting this." A couple of shoppers stopped to watch. One of them, an older woman with a cart, said, "He is not doing anything." Jennifer snapped, "Stay out of this." The woman pulled out her own phone and started recording. Jennifer saw the second camera and hesitated. She said, "This is harassment." I said, "You followed me here, Jennifer. You are the one recording me in a public lot." She said, "I have every right to document violations." I said, "There is no violation. You are stalking me." She said, "I am protecting my community." The older woman said, "Lady, you are making a scene over nothing." Jennifer turned on her, phone swinging around, and said, "Who are you?" The woman said, "I live in Maplewood Commons and I voted against you last election." Jennifer's face went red and she said, "Then you are part of the problem." The woman said, "The problem is you." Jennifer looked around, saw more phones coming out, and got back in her car. She peeled out of the lot, and I stood there with my grocery bags, shaking my head. The older woman came over and said, "I got the whole thing. If you need a witness, here is my number." I thanked her, took the number, and added it to my file. 2 days later, I got an email from the HOA attorney asking me to come in for a recorded statement. I met him at his office, a small suite in a strip mall near the Thruway. He was a younger guy, maybe 35, and he looked tired. He said, "I have been going through the enforcement records, and it is worse than the board realized." I said, "How bad?" He said, "At least 40 violations issued in the last year that do not meet the criteria in the bylaws. Most of them are parking related, and most of them target a very narrow list of homeowners. Your name is on that list, along with about 6 others." I said, "What happens now?" He said, "The board is voting tonight to reverse all 40 violations and issue refunds." They are also terminating the management company contract and hiring an interim manager to freeze enforcement until we can rewrite the rules. I said, "What about Jennifer?" He said, "She is being placed on a no-contact directive by management. If she contacts you again, you can file a restraining order. She is also being removed from the communications director role, effective immediately." I said, "Is she going to fight it?" He said, "She already is. She filed a counter-complaint this morning, claiming you organized a neighbor petition that forces a vote during the meeting." I said, "I did not organize anything." Neighbors started talking after the hearing, and they brought a petition to the board on their own. He said, "I know." I have statements from 10 of them confirming it was grassroots, but she is trying to paint it as a coordinated attack. I said, "She is the one who coordinated. I have the proof." He said, "I know. That is why the board is moving forward with her removal, but it is going to get messy." That night, the board held an emergency session, and I was invited to attend as a witness. The room was packed. Jennifer was there, sitting in the front row with her laptop and a binder full of printouts. Dale started by reading the attorney's report, summarizing the findings and the recommendation to reverse the violations. Jennifer stood up before he finished and said, "I object. This is a witch hunt." Dale said, "Sit down, Jennifer." She said, "No, I want to speak." Dale said, "You will have your turn." She said, "I want it now." Dale banged the gavel and said, "Sit down or you will be removed." Jennifer sat, arms crossed, keys jangling. Dale finished the report and opened the floor for comments. A neighbor named Paul stood up and said, "I got fined twice for guest parking, and both times my guests had valid passes. I want a refund and an apology." Another neighbor, a woman named Teresa, said, "I got fined for parking on the street at 1:55 in the morning. The rule says 2. I was 5 minutes early, and Jennifer still sent a notice." A third neighbor, a guy named Eric, said, "Jennifer told me she could put me on the agenda and keep me there if I did not stop questioning her enforcement. That is abuse of power." Dale said the minutes will record these statements. "Jennifer, do you want to respond?" Jennifer stood up, walked to the front, and opened her binder. She said every single one of these violations was legitimate. Paul's guests did not have valid passes. They had expired decals that he forged. Teresa's vehicle was on the street at 2:03, not 1:55. Eric threatened me in the parking lot after the meeting. I have witnesses. Paul said, "That is a lie." Teresa said, "I have dash cam footage." Eric said, "I never threatened anyone." Dale said, "Jennifer, do you have documentation for these claims?" Jennifer pulled out a stack of photos and said, "Right here." Dale said, "Let me see them." Jennifer walked over and handed him the stack. He flipped through, frowning, and said, "These timestamps do not match what you just said." Jennifer said, "I must have grabbed the wrong file." Dale said, "Or you made it up." Jennifer said, "I did not make anything up." Dale said, "The attorney reviewed your enforcement log and it is full of inconsistencies, dates that do not match photos, violations issued before the alleged infraction occurred, fines sent to homeowners who were out of state at the time. Jennifer, you have been running your own version of the rules, and it stops tonight." Jennifer said, "If you do this, you are opening the HOA to lawsuits." Dale said, "We are already exposed because of what you did." The board votes to remove Jennifer Martinez from the communications director role, effective immediately, and to place her on a no-contact directive with all homeowners pending a full review. All in favor? 4 hands went up. Dale said motion passes. Jennifer, please leave. Jennifer stood there for a moment, binder clutched to her chest, keys jangling one last time. She said, "You are all making a mistake." Then she turned and walked out, and the room erupted in applause again. Dale banged the gavel and said, "We are also voting tonight to terminate the management company contract. The new interim manager will start Monday. All enforcement is frozen until further notice. Any homeowner with a pending fine should contact the attorney for a refund. The minutes will record the reversal and the reason. Meeting adjourned." I walked out into the parking lot, and Marcus was waiting by my van. He said that was the most satisfying thing I have seen all year. I said it is not over. She still has access to vendor contacts and email lists until Monday. He said, "The attorney is locking her out tonight." I said, "Good." He said, "You did it, man. You took down the whole system." I said, "I just wanted to park my van." He laughed and said, "Well, you can park it anywhere you want now." The next morning, I got a call from the interim manager, a woman named Sharon, who had been running HOA turnarounds for 10 years. She said, "I reviewed your file, and I want to apologize. You should never have been targeted like this." I said, "Thank you." She said, "I am also issuing a formal apology letter to the 6 homeowners who were on Jennifer's priority list, and we are refunding all fines issued in the last year." I said, "What about the tow vendor?" She said, "Contract terminated this morning." The owner tried to argue, but when I showed him the call logs showing the coordination with Jennifer, he backed off. I said, "Call logs?" She said, "The attorney subpoenaed them." Turns out Jennifer and the vendor were in contact almost daily, and she was feeding him plate numbers and scheduling information. That is illegal in New York. The vendor is under investigation. I hung up and sat in my van, staring at the guest pass on my dashboard. 3 months ago, Jennifer had tried to clamp my wheel in my own driveway, and now the entire enforcement machine she built was gone. The management company got fired on the spot. The board hired an interim manager who froze enforcement until an audit finished, and Jennifer herself was banned from contacting any homeowner. The tire clamp she brought that rainy morning turned out to be the beginning of her unraveling, because the tow operator who stood back and listened carefully ended up being the one who confirmed the timeline when the attorney asked for vendor records. Karen's own clip, the one she filmed on her gimbal, proved the opposite of her claim when the attorney reviewed it frame by frame and saw that my guest pass was clearly valid and her own timestamp was wrong. The minutes recorded the reversal and the reason, and every neighbor who had been fined got a refund check and a letter from Sharon apologizing for the selective enforcement. I ran into Jennifer one more time about a month later at a gas station near the thruway. She was pumping gas, and I pulled in 2 pumps over. She saw me, and for a second I thought she was going to walk over and start something, but she just stared. Keys in her hand, no jangle this time. I nodded, got back in my van, and drove off. I heard later that she moved out of Maplewood Commons entirely, sold her place to a young couple who had no idea about the towing wars or the enforcement blitz. The new board rewrote the parking rules, cut the guest limits in half, and hired a management company that actually follows procedure instead of personal vendettas. I still drive my route 6 days a week, and I still park in my driveway, and no one has tried to clamp my wheel since. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next HOA story.